Welcome to the Product Design Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Coelen, founder of UX Cabin, where we create world-class web and mobile apps. I'm excited to bring you a behind-the-scenes look into the lives of some of the most interesting and talented people in product design. We'll get strategic advice on how they got to where they are today and things they wish they would have known earlier in their career. All right, today we have Mike Dick on the podcast, and let me tell you, Mike has been around the product design and development industry. In addition to leading design systems at Quora, Twitch, SurveyMonkey, Mike has also started a handful of his own product companies that have got acquired, and he's gone full-time into working on his new finance product Gather. Mike, we are super glad to have you here and welcome you to the podcast. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what do you do, where do you live, what are some of your hobbies?
So I'm currently living in Colorado, just outside of Boulder. And, in my free time, I guess professionally, I'm a product designer and software engineer, developer. So I both design and build things, and that's really, I struggle a lot with what to call myself, in just one word other than just a very long sentence of, hey, I design things and I also build things, so I'm sure we all go through that struggle. But, I started out as, my career is very much a snowball effect of learning one thing after another. We'll probably get into that more later and some other questions you may have. But I think personally, I have two daughters at home. They're 3.5, named Zelda, and a 7-month at home as well that is named Vivian. But we nickname her, we just call her Peach, Princess Peach, Princess Zelda, and that's...
I love that. So are those names or nicknames inspiration from the video games?
Actually, no. That's the funny part. Is it kind of, but not. So let me tell you the story. So
okay.
When my wife was pregnant the first time, we were just sitting there watching. I think it's called The Z of Everything. It's a show on Amazon Prime, and she was sitting there watching it. She was like 2 weeks pregnant, and she's like, "What do you think of the name Zelda?" Because Z of Everything is about the author's wife who wrote Great Gatsby, and my wife loves that time period, and so she's like, "What do you think about the name Zelda?" And I just look over and I was like, "Absolutely, I love that name." And that was probably the easiest naming of a child that the world has ever seen, probably. Well, then fast forward to our second child. One of the nicknames that I have for my wife is she's my Peach, because, she's Southern and she,
sure.
she's my Peach, and so we carried that over to, wanting to name our second child Peach, but we just couldn't do it because of certain reasons and of specifically my last name. And so we went with Vivian, so another classical name.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I remember reaching out to you when I knew your wife was pregnant, and you're having your second one. I was like, please, Mike, if you have a son, please name him Link.
Yeah, can't do it.
So how did you get started in UX? I know as we were kind of getting into our careers, this was kind of a new thing. It was like if you built websites, you kind of you designed, you programmed it, there wasn't like these distinctions between like back end, front end design or anything like that.
It started as, me and my brother, we played Age of Empires a lot, and I'm just go ahead and tell you the whole story. I love stories, right? So
okay.
We were playing Age of Empires. We had a clan, and we looked around at all the other clans, and they all had websites. And so we were like, hey, our clan needs a website. So my brother, being the older brother he was kind of tinkering around with building websites for a few hours, and he was just like, you know what, this is boring, this sucks. And then I just, like, as the little brother, I raised my hand and I was like, I'll do it, that looks fun. And so ironically, you know, that moment, I'll always remember it because, you know, I went on to do web design professionally, you know, for the rest of my life, you know, career. My brother, you know, when he wasn't the webmaster, as we called them back then, he actually went on to just kind of be the owner of the clan and the manager of the clan, and he ended up doing that professionally as well. So it was like that little moment defined both me and my brother for the rest of our lives, you know. And so it's just really
That's
cool.
Crazy.
Yeah. And to kind of get into, so that was the start, you know. That was like, I was using a Squarespace equivalent back then called Homestead, and it was just like drag and drop, you know. And then I kind of like learned that they're like, oh, you mean when I'm dragging and dropping, there's this, it's actually just drawing HTML code behind it. Like same with like Front Page. So I got into Front Page and Dreamweaver, and I was like, oh, it's code behind this. So if I can learn a little bit of HTML, I can do a lot more. And so it was just, now we're getting to this snowball effect I mentioned earlier, which is like, you know, I learned, HTML. And then I was like, there's CSS. You know, if I can learn CSS, I can do a little bit more visually with things. Then I learned I was like, there's this thing called Photoshop that is way better than Microsoft Paint, because I was using Paint to do some graphics. And I was like blown away that I could like have this Photoshop thing. And so I learned a little bit of graphic design or UI. I started to learn UI design. And so that's the snowball, right? And then from doing Photoshop and doing UI design, we didn't call it UI design back then, but I learned, wait a minute, you know, if I can like design the site, you mean the way I design sites will change people's behaviors and how they use my site? So I started to look into psychology and the UX and UI UX and kind of that world. And it was just a snowball, kept going, you know, and, you know, started calling it product design, things like that.
There have been a lot of different names that it kind of changes every year, and that's kind of good as it evolves.
Absolutely. But that's a good point, which is, you know, looking back in my career, I've probably every 2 or 3 years, I reinvent who I am in this career, right? At first I was a web designer, and then, then I stopped calling myself a web designer because then I was a web and mobile designer. And then I was no, I'm not. I'm a UI designer. And then I was a UI UX designer, then a product designer, then, you know, and so there's just so many names, and you kind of really have to continue to reinvent yourself and make sure that you're always calling yourself what you want, like what you want the industry to think you are.
Right. What's your opinion on, you know, designers developing? Like, do you think that's a skill that they should have or be aware of? Do you think it's more of like, I mean, you obviously don't believe in being siloed, but do you, is it more of one of those things where it's like, if you have no interest in development, you should not pursue or look anything into it?
I don't think that later comment is a thing. I definitely think that, you know, if you understand people and how they use things and their motivations behind things, you can definitely be really good at UI design. You don't need to be aware of code and things like that to be a really good designer in our industry, but it helps. I think, you know, understanding your medium is definitely will help you work with other people, will help you work with engineers better. And like, I think, you know, the whole like helping, you know, if you're a designer and you can code, you can just, whether you're good at coding for like production level code or just like getting your hands dirty and prototyping things, that little bit of code, even if you can just write a few lines of code, that can help you communicate better with your stakeholders and like your friends and your coworkers, and that will never, like, communicating better and working better and collaborating better will never go away. So understanding code is a great thing.
Yes.
And also just like for my own personal experience, I've done many startups, and I've built a lot of ideas of mine that have never seen the light of day. And it's because I've been able to like think of the idea and just go build it. I haven't had to, you know, find an engineer to bring this idea to light, you know, and it's really like, whether I'm in-house or doing my own thing, you know, it's the amount of, you know, inspiration and motivation that you can give a team internally, even, you know, in-house at a big company. If you can just do just a little bit of few lines of code can really just spark a little bit of inspiration or a little bit of excitement.
Yeah.
To move to the next step.
One thing I've noticed is I actually got my first job in front-end development, and one thing I've transitioned more into being, you know, pretty heavily focused on just UI, UX, but the one thing I've noticed is that having that background of coding kind of makes my designs more pragmatic, because I will design things in ways that I know would be the most simplest or most efficient way to develop them.
Yeah.
Or I will try to shy people on the team away from like, you know, this approach, this is cool, but if we just change this one little thing, it's going to be way faster to develop. So I think it's made me a lot more pragmatic.
Absolutely. And that's one of the benefits of at least knowing a little bit. Because when I'm working with, you know, my coworkers, they often will have me design something. It'd be like a small feature, like, oh no, like this customer really needs this quick fix done. You know, can we design it real quick? And oftentimes I do the wild version. It's like, let's go wild. Like, what's the ideal version of this, without even thinking about any type of being pragmatic. And then I'll also give them a solution of like, okay, that's the ideal solution, but here is a solution that if we just want to move on, get this done and move on, and this is the easy to code version, you know?
Gosh, yeah.
So,
yeah. That's really interesting. I think it kind of, I think you kind of need, it's almost like sometimes I wish I didn't understand what would go into coding, because like sometimes I don't even pursue things that might be really good ideas just because I know we don't have a ton of time, blah, 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 blah. And I'll just kind of go for the simple instead of like, let's imagine that, you know, all of the developers can do whatever I, you know, want. But double-edged sword.
Yeah. I think there's a time to go wild and a time to be mild. You know, I love using those two words,
I like that.
Mild and wild. It's kind of on a scale. And I think as you get experienced in your field, in your career, you understand, you know when to be wild, you know when to be mild. So,
right. You go wild when you are just doing the design and you're handing off the development to another team and they have to deal with that.
yeah.
No, just kidding. But yeah, so you've kind of been around. You've been at some pretty big name places. Twitch, SurveyMonkey, all of these places. How, like, tell me about your career journey. How did you get your foot in the door in some of those places? How did you get noticed by them? And kind of talk about some of those like high and low points of your career.
Yeah. So, you know, I started doing this a long time ago, right? And so I was doing freelance. I was a freelance, designer / coder for a good 5-6 years before I ever even thought about, I could go work for someone else and do this. I was still in high school. And then whenever I was in like my first year of college, a friend of mine got a job doing web development and I was jealous. You know, I was just like, wow, he's got a job doing that. And so there was this local design agency that I looked up to. And so I wanted a job there and I applied to a job there. It was a PHP development job. I barely knew PHP and they ignored me. Well, then, like took the advice of my parents. They were just like, one thing my dad always told me was, if you stick your hand out, someone will shake it. If you stick your hand out to shake, and so I took that advice and I walked into the agency, into their office and said, hey, I applied for this job. Here's my resume. I would love to chat about it. And that seems a little crazy nowadays to do, but that got me the job. I started like that next Monday. And so that was really like, that was like my first actual real job as doing what I do. Well then, that was the introduction. Well then I went to work for another design that allowed me to like go work for another design agency out in DC. Because Twitter, I had followed this other design agency called Include on Twitter, the founders of it. We kind of just, this was back in like 2008-ish, 2007, where okay. Twitter had just kicked off and like you could actually meet people on Twitter and like, they reached out and was like, hey, we love your work. Come, you want to come work for us? And I was like, well, I'm still in school. They're like, well, come out for an internship. And I said, okay. So I went out there for 3 months and that was kind of like, that changed my life. Just like one, kind of getting out of my hometown was like massive eye opening. And two, like the founders of that company, still today I'm best friends with them, and their outlook on like craft and being really good at your craft was so important to them. And like, that really just changed my outlook on like, it's not just design. It's not just, you're not just putting stuff together. It's like, you're actually like really meticulously improving yourself, like intentionally. So
they reached out to you because they loved your work. Did you have like your website in your Twitter bio, or were you posting stuff to Dribbble? Or
this was pre-Dribbble, so
okay.
It was just, I had my website on my Twitter, and they saw my they saw my website, they liked it, and that was
That's awesome.
Yeah, to kind of answer your question of like how then I transitioned from that to like working at like Quora and all these bigger companies is Silicon Valley companies. I while I was, it's all about relationships. A lot of the things that a lot of the companies I've worked at, it's because I've done a lot of like just meeting and greeting, saying hi to 100%. People early in my career, right? And so it's actually after that design agency, I had done my own startup. I left that to do my own startup called Cage. We can talk about that in a little bit. But the startup that I worked at right after that, my intern there, he went on to work at Google and Quora, and he had a really good relationship with Silicon Valley, back in the day.
Sure.
And he just reached out and was like, hey, we want to do like a Bootstrap for us at Quora. And I was like, that sounds really freaking dope. And so I couldn't say no to that. And that was kind of like we called it that back, and it was before design systems. It was like we want our own internal Bootstrap, and like we didn't call it pattern libraries then and stuff. So so that was my that's when my adventure into design systems started.
That's awesome. So is it true, or is there a sense of like, if you're kind of at one of those bigger name companies, is it easier to make moves to Twitch, SurveyMonkey, because they assume like if you're working here, you've got to be good at what you're doing?
I think it helps a lot, just having that little bit of credibility, I guess, of like, okay, sure. you've been vetted by someone in the past.
That pedigree.
Whatever you want to call it, right? But I think one thing that will always stand out to me is whenever I took that job at Quora, they relocated me to San Francisco, and that weekend when I moved there, I just went to the pool and was just chilling at the hot tub, and there was a couple of other guys there, and they were like, "Hey, what do you do?" I'm like, "Or where do you work?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm a designer. I'm about to start at Quora." And their first reaction was, "Whoa, Quora's a good, like, those are some talented people there, you know?" And I'm just like, "Whew,
Yeah.
whew, good. I validated myself, right?" And so, but that then moving on to like when I went from Quora to Twitch, when I was interviewing, they actually, like, one of the comments that the hiring manager made was like, "Well, we think, you know, honestly, if you can reconcile and like come to grips, not come to grips, I'm trying to think of the word. It was like, if you can figure out and put a system behind the Quora website, then you know what you're doing, you know." And so I'm like, "Okay, thanks." And that was kind of like the, you know, it's not just the name, but it's also kind of like the style of work you're doing, you know?
Sure. Yeah. Going back to kind of what you were saying about, like, it's all about relationships and networking, like, for me, like on the freelancing side or business side, like, I can't tell you how many times I've met with someone and, you know, 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road, they come back and they're like, "Hey, remember when we talked?
Mm-hmm.
You know, obviously we didn't have a project then, but we have something now." And I'm probably one of the last people they talk to, and I'm still in their mind. And I ended up getting a ton of work this way. Like, when I first started out, I built a website for this guy, didn't know what I was doing, but I'm like, this is awesome. This is like printing money. And I printed off flyers, and I went to like every business in my local town, and I was going into places like H&R Block and be like, "Hey, you guys need a new website?" And they were kind of like, "You know, that's cute, pat you on the head." But for all of the people that like didn't give me a website, like, this kind of validated this in my head. Like, I gave, you know, something to someone at like Pizza Hut or H&R Block, and they obviously they weren't going to use it, but they gave it to someone that was talking about a website, and I got a call literally like the next day for like a small local restaurant to do like a $500 website. And I was like, I literally just made $500 out of thin air, and that's like the lottery when you're in college. And like, if I was to say one thing to like anybody listening, it's focus on your portfolio. Yes, that's great, but even more than that, focus on like meeting and connecting with people, and just expanding your network and your reach.
Yep, absolutely.
So it sounds like you've had a lot of, you know, nice high points in your career. Looking back, what are some things that you might have done differently, or some things that were like frustrating to you that you would have approached differently, had you know what you know now?
Yeah, I mean, you know, some of my high points are also could be low points too. You know, it's like, for instance, you know, selling my first startup, it was a high point, but also a low point. You know, it's like, that's probably cliche to say, but it was like very sad time for me. Very happy time as well. It's like almost like it was such an emotional roller coaster. I wasn't sure if I was happy or if I was sad. Like, I just had no idea what the emotion was, and so it was just like, you know, and that plagued me for a very long time. You know, sometimes even
What was
today.
your first startup?
It was called Cage. It was a design collaboration app. Like, so you can think InVision, but before it was InVision.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was just like that. You could upload, you know, your designs, get feedback on top of it, like annotation, and draw on top of it and things like that. They're still around. They're still kicking. Seems to be going really strong. But, you know, it also is kind of like, the low point there was just like looking back now is like the frustration of like, if I knew what I knew now, it was like, I wish that, you know, there's some communication bits that I wish I could have worked on better. You know, it's like, I think the most frustrating parts of my career has always been oh, if I only just communicated a little bit better or a little bit differently,
Wow.
or a little bit more. So,
Yeah.
and
So is part of the looking back of like um, regret of like what it could have been had you stuck with it and made it your own, or was it like you exited or sold too early, or just miss the ownership of that product in general?
a little bit of all three of those things. Yeah. But kind of like fast forwarding to, maybe leading, when you're leading teams and leading design systems, some frustrations is like, just when you're leading bigger teams and not just like doing your craft and being an individual contributor, oftentimes it's like negotiating budget and negotiating headcount and negotiating,
Right.
with your manager and the leadership, and not being understood, or not knowing what's exactly is the nut I need to crack to like get them to just be like, hey, here's unlimited budget. Here, go do your thing, So,
Right.
because I think we all feel that with design systems. If you've ever worked on one and tried to sell one at a company, is, we can all agree there's a benefit to them, but it's so hard to quantify so that your leadership will invest in it without, I think a lot of companies who see large investment in design systems probably are actually like, there's a little bit of trust and hope, there versus like actual like quantitative data of like,
Right.
oh, you mean if we throw more money at it, it gets better.
Right. Right. That's really interesting. Because you're talking about like you're in a company and you're not trying to sell a product to like an outside client or another company, but you almost have to sell your process to your internal team in order to do good work.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, you're instead of selling clients, you're just kind of selling something different to an internal stakeholder, right? And what I've learned is that like even no matter amount, like there's not enough like good quotes and like good feedback internally you can get to like help convince leadership that it's a good thing.
Right.
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 And I once got the advice. I once got the advice from one of the VPs somewhere that I worked that it's kind of good advice, but I did which is it was the best way to get headcount and bigger budget is to stop hitting your goals and stop hitting your deadlines. And and it was kind of sounds, I mean, if you peel that onion back a little bit, what they really meant was, if everything's going great on your team and you're shipping and you're hitting every single point and every single metrics and things are going really good, things need to be going really good, but also they need to be going so good you're not doing enough. You're not hitting your goals, right? And so that was really good feedback. Advice.
That's like a little bit of 3D chess there. Like
yeah.
things are going so well, but we're not able to do our full potential because of budget or whatever else.
Yeah. But that's the same with like what I've noticed, just like raising money. If you've got a startup and you're trying to raise money, you need to be completely underwater, like with so much traction and so much growth and so much, revenue or whatever you want to, measure against, that you're underwater and your things are going great, but you're still underwater. So,
right.
If you're like hitting every metric and things are going good and you're happy and you don't feel stressed, it's like, well, what do you need the money for? Or what do you need the headcount for on your systems team? So,
right. So you have made probably more products individually than most people have ideas for products. Maybe we can talk a little bit about, a lot of people have ideas. Obviously, the value is in the execution, but like, I think people see someone like you and they're like, oh, Mike had, three ideas, and he executed on them, and they all went really well. And I'm guessing, I don't know if this is true, but I'm guessing you probably had about 500 ideas. You explored a ton of them, and a lot of them were crap. A lot of them were maybe potential, maybe not the right timing, but maybe you can give some color to the quantity that needs to go in for the quality to come out on an idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so timing is everything when it comes to an idea. I mean, not everything, but it's a very important thing. And I learned that pretty early on. But I think, I have ideas all day, every day. Me and my best friends, we have a group chat that we all day long are just like, okay, hear me out, just hear me out. What about, and we just say it, and we're just like, 90% of the time it's like, ha, that's dumb, and we're all honest with each other, right? And there's sometimes where it's like, yeah, that's a viable, like that's a cool idea, but maybe the market just doesn't want it just yet, or maybe it's too early, or while it's a good idea, like we don't have any indication whether the market and people actually want it. So we just kind of pass on it, and just kind of like, okay, let's just got to be okay passing on ideas. But that wasn't how I was early on, in my career, where good 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, about 15 years ago, I was very proactive about, I've got an idea, I'm gonna go build it. I never cared about the market and the viability of it, or whether or not people want it. It was like, well, hey, it was a cool idea that I thought of, I'm gonna go build it because I have nothing else to do. As I matured in my career and have less and less time and just kind of got more mature, because that exercise, if you've ever heard of, you have to put in the hours, that was, looking back, that was me putting in the hours,
right.
Of I really just kind of massaged that muscle of knowing what's a good idea, what's not a good idea, what's good timing, what's not good timing, what, for instance, and I kind of matured in my career and just started to kind of I was able to spot those ideas, of whether something was going to be good or not, and good is
sure.
It's a factor whether of just do people also want it? Is it something that you can market easily? Is it viral? Is it not viral? Is it consumer? And am I going to have to go viral to make this business, turn it into a business? Or is it do I need to go get a sales team to pump behind, right, and just go sell a bunch of companies on a B2B idea? So
I would even argue that the reason that you, and I think this is what you're saying, the reason that your products that you've put out into the world and have got traction are a result of the tons of things that you did and worked on, and the compound interest of your putting the hours in for the things that didn't see the light of day, or the things that didn't end up being something successful. I kind of think of it like a lot of people, if we equate this to painting, a lot of people are like, I've got a really good idea for a painting. It's going to have a beautiful sky. It's going to have a lake. It's going to have all of these things. And they're just thinking about it, talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the very first time, they go in and they're like, all right, I'm going to draw it. And this is the first time they've ever tried to draw a painting. So obviously it comes out not awesome.
Yep.
But it's like if you try drawing it 100 times, it's going to be better every time. And I think, executing ideas just for the purpose of execution just compounds so much for you later in your life or career.
It really does. Yeah. For instance, an idea that I had back in like 2015 was a no code solution where I called it codekit.com, and it was like, import your your coded design system, and then designers could use those coded components to design with. And this was before Figma. This was around the time Figma was like really starting to take off.
Okay.
Maybe it was like 2016, something like that, and maybe 17. My timing is so bad, but the reason why I started to build it, I started to work on it, and I built a landing page for it to like collect emails, and it had a lot of good traction. But ultimately, I was just like, while the timing might be right, there's also other players in this space that are moving a lot faster than me, and it's just
Right.
like knowing to like stop and just stop working on that idea was probably a good idea. And as soon as I decided to stop working on it, it was like every week there was a new one coming out, or
Right.
not coming out, but being announced. Like every week there was like 3 or 4 sign up for the beta, or the wait list, and we're not launched yet. And, and then you talk to those people and they're like, no, we don't have anything built either. It's just an idea of ours. I think now 4 years later, there's a lot of like companies who are starting to crack that nut, but it's just kind of like, I think one of my points is like, not only is it timing and execution and all those other things, but also just like, are you the person to also do that?
Sure.
It's like, while I might have had the design system experience, I did not have the development chops that I realized I needed to like ingest any design system, so it's just like,
That's good. Yeah. You got to know when to fold them for sure.
yeah.
I've also seen the opposite, where someone is dead set on idea and they're like, I know this will be successful. And it's just like, maybe from the outside, people looking in, it's like, man, this might be a good idea, but you just don't have the skill set to take this to where it needs to be. And, or like, this looks amazing, but no one's going to use it. Like, there's just so many variables, and having that like self-awareness to be like, know when to quit, know when to pursue another thing. I have the problem where I have shiny object syndrome, where I'm, if I could stick with something longer, one product longer, that would probably be better. But I'm always just like, ooh, I have a new idea for a domain. I can build a product around this domain, like, all that type of stuff.
Yeah. In my friend chat, it's constantly one of my, his name's Marty. His saying is, domain first, idea second.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's a joke. I mean sometimes it's not a joke, but sometimes it is.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So let's try to get into your current product, Gather. Tell us a little bit about what Gather is and what spurred the idea and the need for it, and how did you kind of validate these things as you were deciding to build it or not to build it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Gather is it's a collaborative personal finance tool, but for couples. So you can think of it very much like Mint, like what Mint was. Mint.com is a personal finance tool or app. We're like that, but specifically for couples, and kind of targeting that niche. And we're collaborative. And so what that means is like we're helping couples have healthier conversations about their money, because we've learned, like, from our research, money is the number 2 reason why couples or relationships end. And when we first started the kind of thinking about, hey, let's do a personal finance app, we weren't really thinking about couples. We were just like, hey, Mint kind of sucks. Like, it hasn't changed in 15 years. And everyone we talk to, you can say, yeah, everyone agrees. And so we're like, maybe there's opportunity there, and we're like, I don't know, and one of my buddies, a co-founder, Evan, every year around tax season, he builds an app to like a very small mini micro personal finance app to help him do his taxes, and then he throws it away. Well, when we started this app, it was the year where like he had did something and he kept it going, but he was just kind of hacking on it for fun. Sure. And I was like, dude, you kind of got something here. He'd been doing this for like 8 years, right? And it was just always never felt like the right timing. And then it was this, 2019 that we were just like, you know what? Maybe it's the right time maybe people do want a new Mint. Maybe it's the right timing, right? And we kind of talked about it for, a few months, and finally what got us to actually start hacking on it was we both agreed, you know what? We both want it. Let's just build something that we want to use. And if no one ever wants to sign up for it, who cares? At least we have something we want and we're going to use it ourselves. And I'm like, that's actually cool, because me and my wife need something, way better way to manage our finances. So when we kind of committed to that, we started to look at the research, and that's when we started to kind of double click on, wait a minute, couples finances, like an untapped niche, and no one's really tackling this space. And so that's when we started to like really hone in on this, like, oh, let's be collaborative and let's help couples have conversations about their money. And, also kind of looking at like, let's change their behavior. If you first need to like remove the stress of money, money is a very stressful thing. So kind of understanding behavioral things that we can do with our product to help desensitize themselves to money in a way helps lower stress and improve conversation quality. And so we've built a lot of mechanics in our app around conversation and transparency that point to having a better dynamic, that kind of output a better dynamic.
Gotcha. So what type of things does Gather give that like, obviously it's a super like modern, clean design. What things of like, what challenges were you able to like overcome just because of like product design, things that you built into it that maybe something like Mint or just tracking things in Excel doesn't have?
So we have this feature that we call the inbox, where when you make a purchase, all of your financial transactions, when they happen, they land in your inbox, and you can categorize them, you can rename them, you can leave comments on them and like mention your partner. That inbox is like, you can leave love notes, or you can ask like, yo, did you really need another hamburger this week? So we see a lot of cool, like interesting, just like when we talk to our customers, just they share a little bit, and they're just like, the inbox has completely changed how they deal with their finances. It's like,
that's really cool.
Yeah. Like, so when you finish doing what you need to do, like commenting, categorizing, etc., you can archive it just like Gmail, and like it'll go away, and then you can search for it later, or you can kind of see it surface in your budgets or in your trends. So the whole idea of it is just like very much like your Gmail is check it every single day, get to inbox 0 as much as possible. And that little like behavioral hack right there has been, I call it a behavioral hack because, we've now, like, what we've noticed over time is we call them like paycheck checkers, or like they only come in to look at their finances every time they get paid. What we've noticed is that's actually, that's every 2 weeks, every month. That's actually starting to come down to, daily and weekly users, just for the sake of staying on top of their finances.
One thing I've noticed is that just by having a budget and just by being aware of what you're spending, you end up usually spending less. Which is like, even if you don't have a plan to do anything, it's kind of, I don't know if there's like some psychological law around it, but there's also a thing of like, if you step on the the scale every day, you're going to be a little bit more cognizant of like what you're eating, how healthy you're being. And I'm sure, uh, same exact thing in budgeting. So
Absolutely.
That's a pretty ingenious feature.
Yeah. There's this in dieting. We draw this. There's a study, or like they call it the hamburger diet or the cheeseburger diet. Have you heard of that?
No.
So it's this study where I'm not sure if it's a study or not. It was on Freakonomics, and so I looked into it more, the podcast, and apparently, so there's this thing where if you eat 2 cheeseburgers a day, or I mean not day, a week, if you dedicate yourself to eat 2 cheeseburgers a week, sorry, then you would think you're going to become unhealthy over time. Right? But actually the reverse happens where they notice that if you say Tuesdays and Thursdays is my cheeseburger day, you actually on the other days eat healthier, you exercise more, just unconsciously, because you're like, whoa, I'm gonna eat a hamburger tomorrow. I need to watch what I eat today. Or, oh, I had a hamburger yesterday, I'm gonna go on a walk today. And so
that's fascinating.
And so what ended up happening was like the study, this lady, she would go to the doctor. She went to the doctor before she started this diet and every week during the diet. And I forget how long she did it, but surprisingly, her vitals got better and better while eating these cheeseburgers.
That is crazy.
Yeah. And she didn't actually I think she didn't mean to do this, but she was actually just reviewing, because I think the hometown that she's from was the cheeseburger capital of the world, supposedly. So she was like, I'm going to go do a review of every single cheeseburger in my hometown. And so that's why she's like, she was going to the doctor just to make sure that she wasn't dying. And her doctor was like, what are you doing? You're getting healthier, and she's like, what? So we kind of apply that same kind of like behavioral hack to your finances as a relationship too.
Love it. So, when you're building your own product, there's like a few ways that you can do it, right? You can bootstrap it, where you try to do everything yourself, or you can raise funding, try to get someone to say, yes, this is a really good idea, and I want to, basically purchase equity in it, and give you a lot of money to go execute on this. What's your take on like when you should pursue funding, when you should bootstrap? Do you have a preferred method of what you like to do?
Really all depends on the kind of lifestyle that you want to lead, probably. When you raise money, you need to turn a profit within like 18 months, or at least show signs that you can turn a profit so that you can raise again. It's very rare that I've seen that you raise money, let's say, oh, I'm going to go raise $1 million. Well, before you run out of $1 million, you have to like prove that you can make money, and that you can make more than $1 million so that you can raise more money. And oftentimes, you need traction. You need a lot of, different investors look for different metrics of traction. Some of them like to see, and you really have to it's a relationship game. It's meet with hundreds of investors, and maybe 2 or 3 of them will, jive with it and be comfortable. So, whereas if you bootstrap, you can kind of take your time. You can really focus in on different metrics. I think oftentimes when you're raising like a seed round or a pre-seed round, the metrics that you try to track are often vanity metrics, that really just to impress enough investors to sell them that your idea is great because you're pre-revenue, pre everything, right? And so it's more about like, is the idea there? Is this a good idea? Versus if you build an idea, launch it, and try to go get money after that, they're going to immediately start thinking, they're going to start looking at, is this a good business? And I think that's the different factors there, right? It's like really early, you're betting on the founders and the idea, and they don't care about metrics, right? And they're just kind of you're selling them the idea. Whereas if you launch or at least go public, the conversation turns. I've noticed with my own, when I've tried to raise money in the past on ideas or not raise money, is the conversation definitely changes if you're private, versus public to the world.
Do you have a preferred method of what you personally like to do when you're building your own product?
I personally, what jives with my own lifestyle is bootstrapping. I like the freedom of focusing in on metrics that make a better customer experience and user experience and better product. Really being able to focus in on retention and building a product that people stick around for versus just like trying to become a growth hacking, mindset company.
I think kind of the product determines what you're going to have to do. Because if you're going to do some sort of like social platform, you have to raise money because you're going to be running it for 10 years before you see any profit anyway. So it's like, unless someone's paying for it or you have some way to monetize your users, it's like you're going to have to raise 7 rounds and hope you make unicorn.
Yep. And I think there's a lot of I think a lot of people they look through the glass window and say, wow, they're raising money. That's cool. I want to raise money. I want an idea that people invest in. And that's kind of how I was when I first raised money. And when you actually raise money, it was I think about 6 months later, it was like, wait a minute, we got to turn a profit. It's like the clock starts ticking, and it's a very stressful game of having to raise money again or having to turn traction, turn on growth and things like that.
I haven't done anything crazy, but in the few small little things that I've done that are the products that kind of make money when I'm sleeping, not trading time for money. I'm super pumped about little indie products that maybe make people a few $1,000s extra a month. Things that people who are pursuing things are like, I know this isn't going to be a groundbreaking idea, but it can help pay my mortgage.
Absolutely.
And if that happens, that's life changing. And, everyone wants to do the big, the awesome thing, but I think one really helpful mindset could be hey, what if you just try to make something that pays your cell phone bill or your gives you a little bit of extra cushion to be able to do what you want. I think there's so many opportunities for that, and I personally am much more of the bootstrap minded thing. There's no way I could do the amount of work needed to satisfy investors with a wife and kids, but it's all super interesting, and really enjoy that space.
Yeah, I mean, you have a good point where it's we all would aspire to be a $1 billion company or $100 million company, but what's wrong with $1 million a year? I mean, that's a lot of money as a bootstrapped self-employed person running running their little side gig, right? And even like you said, just pay my cell phone bill. That's a cell phone you didn't got to pay for. So sure, investors don't have that mindset, right? They're wanting to 10x or 100x their cash, right? So they look at these little indie startups and it's yeah, y'all are only making $5,000 a month. We're not interested, right? But it's fine. That's paying my mortgage. That's paying my kids to go to school or something like that, you know?
Exactly. Well, hey, Mike, thank you so much for coming on. I had a great time chatting with you, and
yeah, you too.
You've got a lot of wisdom, and hopefully, everyone listening can take a little something away from this conversation and be like Mike. So,
thank you. It was good chatting with you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today on the Product Design Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure and go follow our guest. Let them know they did a great job and you learned a lot. More to come in the following weeks as we bring on new guests. Please hit that subscribe button so that you will get these podcasts and learn a ton about the product design community. Excited to see you next time. Thanks.